Rock and roll developed in many ways over the years, but one thing remains unchanged: the Beatles' influence. So, can you imagine how different the world would be if the Beatles had actually reunited? And on one Saturday in 1976, they almost did. Let's dive in. Before we explore exactly how the Beatles almost reunited, it's important to first understand how the band initially split. After a tumultuous 7 years, the great foursome of Paul McCartney, John Lennon, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr decided to go their separate ways in 1970. The Fab Four had been pushed to the brink of exhaustion due to relentless touring and recording, as well as personal animosity between band members. And here was the final straw. A man named Brian Epstein, who was the Beatles' manager, died in August 1967. Without Epstein, the quartet felt like they had lost a crucial leader and guardian, a man who was the glue that held the Beatles together. This man had done leagues to manage the egos and finances of the most successful band in history, but suddenly his guidance was gone. And so were the Beatles. And as they became increasingly desperate for funds, the band found themselves once again split over who they wanted to take over as their manager. While Lennon, Harrison, and Starr wanted Alan Klein of the Rolling Stones to take over, Paul McCartney wanted their managers to be the father and brother of his soon-to-be wife, Linda. The plan to reunite the Beatles was incredibly simple, and it was masterminded by Lorne Michaels, the creator of Saturday Night Live. All the Beatles had to do was get together again. The entire nation wanted this as well. With the breakup of the group still fresh in everyone's minds, the idea of an on-air reunion was too tantalizing to pass up. The broadcast started with a piece directed to the camera, addressing the audience and explaining how the Beatles had affected so many lives. In my book, the Beatles are the best thing that ever happened to music, Michaels said. It goes even deeper than that. You're not just a musical group, you're a part of us. We grew up with you. And with that, Michaels suggested a deal. The Beatles were to come together on the show, play 3 songs, and split a check of $3,000 between the 4 of them. But it's also been said that no one has yet to come up with enough money to satisfy you. Well, if it's money you want, there's no problem here, Michaels said. The National Broadcasting Company has authorized me to offer you this check to be on our show. While audiences at home may have initially thought Michaels' offer was exceedingly serious, they began to laugh at the mentioned amount of $3,000, a far cry from the millions that the Beatles were capable of making. Still, Michaels wasn't done with the skit. He continued explaining that all the Beatles had to do was play 3 songs. It'll be easy. Like I said, this is made out to the Beatles. You divide it any way you want. If you want to give Ringo less, that's up to you. I'd rather not get involved. While the skit was clearly a joke and audiences across the country had a good laugh, deep down they were wishing and hoping that the Beatles would reunite once again. And despite the facetious offering made by Michaels, the idea of a Beatles reunion was much closer to happening than anyone thought. It almost happened. It was so close. In fact, both John Lennon and Paul McCartney were both a mile away or so from the very show as it was broadcasted, and were watching it in the same room. They were having a night off and watching SNL together. And while audiences might have taken the skit as something of a joke, the duo had an incredibly serious moment as they thought of actually reuniting the band and taking the offer. Almost. Had this happened, you can imagine the reaction from the audience. But it wasn't to be, as John Lennon later admitted. Paul was visiting us at our place in the Dakota. We were watching it and almost went down to the studio just as a gag. We nearly got into a cab, but we were actually too tired. He and I were just sitting there watching the show and we went, haha, wouldn't it be funny if we went down? But we didn't. As if that wasn't bad enough, Paul McCartney confirmed the story by saying, John said, we should go down, just you and me. There's only 2 of us, so we'll take half the money. And for a second. But it would have been work, and we were having a night off, so we elected not to go. It was a nice idea. We nearly did it. For what it's worth, the world may never know what would have happened. What is certain, though, is that the vision of John Lennon and Paul McCartney reuniting the Beatles on live television would remain an exciting thought that danced around everyone's minds, but would never be realized. Realistically, all the duo had to do was convince each other to get off the couch and take the few steps necessary to reunite the band. But in the end, it was not meant to be, and we are all left with a great what if. Although it wasn't to be, the story of how the Beatles almost reunited is an intriguing one. Beyond this, it didn't just end there. George Harrison would go on to be a musical guest on Saturday Night Live later in the year and carry on the joke. He appeared on the show much to the delight of audience members and Michaels alike. Despite this, the show would go on to accomplish nothing in actually reuniting the members of the band, and instead offered a fun laugh for viewers. He and Michaels discussed the split, with Harrison agreeing that for an extra $250, he would say the show's iconic opening line, "Live from New York, it's Saturday night." Although this was a funny moment that would stay at the forefront of the audience's minds for quite a while, it was nothing like the moment when Lennon and McCartney almost showed up and reunited the Beatles in one single motion. So while it was in a way an extension of the Beatles, it also didn't accomplish the one thing that would have been accomplished. Sadly, the show would never be able to reunite the Beatles. Lennon and McCartney was never to appear as a group with the rest of the Beatles, despite the almost reunion. In rock culture, this moment was solidified as a moment that almost changed the entire game, but it never happened. In the end, the Beatles never reunited, but the story of how they almost did is an interesting one. On that fateful Saturday in 1976, the Beatles were a mere cab ride away from reuniting and making history. Instead, we're left with what could have been, and can only imagine what would have happened had they taken Lorne Michaels' offer that night. If they had taken his offer, who knows how the course of music history would have changed. There are a few things to explore, however. Imagine how the Beatles could have shifted the music industry if they had reunited, as well as how much money and fame the four of them could have made. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you in the next video.